So I recently went through something I wouldn't wish on anyone. It started on what should have been an ordinary Saturday, one of those days where the hum of the world feels steady and predictable. But life has a way of twisting the ordinary into something unforgettable. I remember the smell first, the hot tang of metal as I stood in my garage sharpening saw blades, the rhythmic scrape of steel that always gave me a sense of calm. I thought the only noise I'd hear that morning would be Buddy Bryce knocking at my door with a six-pack for the game later. Instead, it was the harsh, unfamiliar buzz of a hedge trimmer. At first, I brushed it off. My yard guy had been by just 2 days earlier. The hedges, 6 feet of green privacy I loved more than I could admit, were already trimmed neat, squared like the walls I built for a living. But the sound grew louder, more insistent, as if someone was hacking, not trimming. That's when I stepped out of the side door. And there she was, Karen Dunn. Crisp white tennis shorts, a pink polo, the kind of uniform that said I'm in charge before her mouth even opened. Her jaw was set in that self-righteous way that told you she wasn't there to help, she was there to conquer. And conquer she did. She was tearing through my hedges like a general on the battlefield, the trimmer growling in her hands, spitting leaves and branches as if my yard had personally offended her. Beside her, a man I didn't know stuffed what used to be my privacy into paper bags. I froze. It's funny how your brain doesn't always catch up right away to what your eyes are screaming. I just stood there, watching this small woman dismantle what I had loved most about my property. 6 feet of living green turned into jagged, broken stumps. And with every cut, it felt like she was carving into something deeper than just branches. When I finally found my voice, it wasn't anger that came out. It was control. I pulled out my phone and hit record. If there's one thing I've learned from years on job sites, it's that yelling doesn't fix a crooked wall. You don't win by swinging first. You win by proving, by building something stronger than the mess in front of you. "Excuse me," I said evenly. She didn't stop. The trimmer wailed as if daring me to push harder. Finally, she glanced up, not guilty, not surprised, just annoyed, like I had interrupted her morning coffee. "Morning, Michael," she said casually, as though she were my friend and this was her yard. "Just cleaning up the sightlines. We've had complaints." I panned the camera from her to the wreckage, back again. "Complaints from who? And what gives you the right to be on my property cutting my plants?" That was when she finally killed the trimmer. The silence that followed was almost worse, loud in its finality. She wiped a bead of sweat from her forehead with the back of her glove and gave me a smile that tasted like vinegar. "The community has a right to clear and safe sightlines. Your overgrown bushes were a hazard. We can't have the street looking." She hesitated, then spat it out like poison. "Blue collar." That word hit harder than I expected, like she was accusing me of lowering the worth of her kingdom. "They're hedges," I said flatly. 6 feet, within code. They've been here since I bought the house." Her smile tightened, the kind that wasn't a smile at all. "The board has discretion." "Discretion isn't a tape measure," I shot back. For the first time, just for a flicker, she looked rattled when I raised my phone higher, the little red recording light glowing like a warning. "You know I'm recording this, right?" Her eyes hardened again. "Go right ahead. It just shows an HOA president taking proactive steps for safety." And with that, she fired the trimmer back up, like a soldier raising her weapon, and gutted another 10 feet of my privacy. Her brother-in-law hauled bag after bag to a truck parked across the street, never daring to meet my eyes. I didn't stop her, not because I couldn't, because this wasn't a fight I was going to win with raised voices or fists. This was a war of proof, and I was already collecting my ammunition. I filmed every cut, every haul, every raw stump left bleeding from her blade. I even zoomed in on the property marker, clear evidence that those hedges were mine and mine alone. When she finished the entire length, she gave me a curt nod as if she had just done me a favor. Then she left. No apology, no acknowledgement, just the hollow buzz of silence left behind. I stood in that wreckage, phone in my hand, heart pounding slow and heavy. My privacy was gone, my yard stripped bare. The game on TV no longer mattered. In that moment, fury bubbled hot in my gut, but I didn't let it spill. I didn't scream, didn't throw anything. I just stood there, the video saved, my resolve hardening like wet concrete. Because if there's one thing I know better than most, it's how to build. And standing there among the ruins of my hedges, I realized I wasn't just going to rebuild. I was going to create something that would last longer than her petty power ever could. Not out of anger, out of principle. That was the moment the plan began. Why is it that the quietest moments are the ones that burn into your memory? That night, long after Karen had butchered my hedges and marched off as if she'd won some great battle, I sat on my back patio staring at the jagged stumps she'd left behind. The crickets chirped, the air smelled faintly of cut wood, but all I could hear was the echo of that trimmer and her smug voice. We can't have the street looking blue-collar. I'm not a man who shouts at storms. I don't swing first. But I build for a living, and builders know something others forget. When something is torn down, you don't mourn it. You figure out how to rebuild it stronger. So I picked up the phone and called the one man who understood how messes flow. Buddy Bryce, plumber by trade, lifelong friend by choice. I sent him the video. His reply was simple. I have a shovel, say the word. It made me laugh despite the coal of anger in my chest. But brute force wasn't the plan, not yet. I told him to come over anyway. I needed another set of eyes, someone who wouldn't let me drown in fury. While I waited, I went inside, sat at my kitchen table, and printed out the entire HOA covenant, 112 pages, words so dry they could suck the moisture out of a desert. But to me, it read like a blueprint. Every clause, every subsection was a load-bearing wall, and every loophole a crack waiting to be widened. I highlighted in yellow, circled in red, my contractor's eye searching for weaknesses. By the time Buddy arrived, carrying a six-pack like it was a peace offering, I already had the beginnings of something solid. He stepped into the yard, whistled low at the wreckage, then shook his head. "She really did a number on this," he muttered. "Want me to go talk to her husband?" I shook my head. "Nope, we're going to beat her with her own rule book." He cracked open a beer, sat across from me at the table littered with bylaws, and listened as I laid it out. Page 47, Section 8, Subsection C, fences and walls, masonry allowed, 6 feet max. Setbacks required, but my line was a full 10 feet clear. Perfect. Then came the jewel. Page 98, Section 14, Subsection A, Architectural Control Committee had 14 days to approve or deny any exterior modification. If they failed to respond, automatic approval. 14 days of silence was as good as a signature. That was her weakness. Neglect, arrogance. The very thing she'd relied on to intimidate others was about to become the hammer I'd use against her. The next morning I crossed the property line, not into Karen's domain, but toward a neighbor I'd never truly spoken to. Tom, retired accountant, quiet man, he listened as I told him everything. His kitchen smelled of fresh coffee and something older like patience. When I finished, he stirred his cup and said quietly, "We call her Queen Karen. She runs this place like her own kingdom. The ACC, just her and 2 friends. They deny for sport, approve for allies. And the fines." He looked me in the eye. "That's her punishment tool. She's been bleeding this community for years." I asked him why no one fought back. His answer was simple. "Fear, she counts on it. People don't want the trouble, they just give up." But I wasn't built to give up. My entire job was calling bluffs. Clients, inspectors, suppliers, I dealt with lies and pressure every day. Karen Dunn was just another job site, messy, loud, and waiting for someone who knew how to bring order. So I got to work. 2 days I spent drafting, not a sketch, not a doodle, blueprints. Professional, airtight, bulletproof. 100 feet of cinder block wall, 6 feet tall, reinforced with rebar and bonded like a fortress. Every line drawn to code, every note backed by county regulation. On Monday morning, I filmed myself sliding the thick envelope into the HOA Dropbox, timestamp clear on my phone. The clock was ticking. 14 days. And as I walked back to my truck, I felt something I hadn't felt since Karen fired up that trimmer. Calm. Because while she thought she'd cut down my privacy, what she'd really done was give me the chance to build something far stronger. And this time, she wouldn't see it coming until it was already standing. Everyone talks about battles as if they start with shouting, but the most dangerous kind of fight is the quiet one. The 2 weeks that followed were exactly that, silent, calculated, and heavy with waiting. I went about my life, heading to job sites by day, coming home to my butchered hedges at night, each evening staring at the raw stumps that used to be my wall of peace. Every time I sat on my back patio, Karen's absence was as loud as her presence had been. No letters, no phone calls, no visit from the board, nothing. She thought she had won. She thought I'd do what everyone else did, grumble, give up, and move on. But her silence wasn't victory, it was my approval slip. Buddy called every few days. "Heard anything from the Queen?" he'd ask, his voice thick with sarcasm. "Not a peep, I'd say." "Good," he'd reply. "Let the silence do the work." Day 14 came and went. Still nothing. And so, before the sun rose on day 15, I stepped out onto my driveway with a cup of coffee and a steady heart. My application was now approved by default, written into the very bylaws she had used to torment everyone else. And I was ready. I'd already pulled the county permit, called 811 to mark the utilities. A delivery truck rolled up just as the first light broke the horizon, carrying pallets of gray cinder blocks, bags of mortar mixed stacked like soldiers, bundles of steel rebar shining in the morning chill. The driver whistled low when he saw the order. "Building a fortress?" he asked with a grin. "Something like that," I said. The first step was the hardest, digging the trench. 100 feet long, straight as a ruler, deep enough to hold the weight of what was coming. Sweat rolled down my back as I carved into the earth, shovel biting into soil, level checking my every move. Each scoop felt like I was burying Karen's smug smile a little deeper. By the time I finished, the trench stretched clean and true, a line drawn in the ground where her pettiness had ended and my resolve had begun. Then came the concrete. I didn't mess with bags and wheelbarrows. I called in a truck, the low rumble shaking the morning air as gray slurry poured thick into the trench. That was when she appeared. Karen done. She stood across the street, arms crossed over her pink polo, lips pinched so tight they could have cracked glass. Her perfect lawn framed her like a throne. She didn't say a word, she didn't have to. Her glare spoke volumes. I didn't look at her, not once. I focused on my work, smoothing the wet concrete, making it perfect. Because the foundation is everything. If the base isn't level, the wall isn't true. That's construction, and it's life. Once it cured, I began laying block. Butter with mortar, set, tap, check level, scrape excess. Repeat, over and over, a rhythm as steady as a heartbeat. Every fourth block tied with rebar, every course locked tight. It was patience, precision, and persistence. Buddy came over, hauling blocks and mixing mortar. He wiped sweat from his brow, grinning. "Man, this is therapy. Only better, therapy doesn't give you a wall." Neighbors watched from windows. Some offered hesitant waves. Others, the ones who whispered with Karen at HOA meetings, just scowled. I didn't care. The camera I'd set up on a tripod captured it all, time-lapse footage of a wall rising from the earth like something inevitable. By the end of the week, it stood tall, 6 feet of unbroken cinder block, 100 feet long, perfectly straight. My fortress. My privacy reborn, not with leaves and branches, but with stone and steel. I stepped back, wiped the grit from my hands, and looked at what I'd built. Solid, unyielding, mine. That was when the screech of tires shattered the quiet. Karen's car jerked to a stop in front of my house, door slamming as she stormed out, face flushed crimson. She marched up to the wall like it had personally insulted her. "What is this?" she shrieked, voice sharp enough to cut glass. I gave her a calm, polite smile. "It's a wall," I said, "approved." Her eyes darted to the leftover sledgehammer leaning against a pile of spare blocks. She snatched it up, jabbing it toward the wall like a threat. Buddy murmured behind me, low and steady, "Smile, Queen, this is your good side." She slammed the sledge down hard on the patio. The metal rang against concrete, but the wall didn't flinch. "This isn't a prison," she snapped. "Good news," I said softly. "No one's sentenced to live here." Phones rose like periscopes from the neighbors' yards, lenses pointed at the scene. Karen's eyes flickered, realizing too late that the moment had already been captured. And in that instant, with the wall behind me and the neighborhood watching, I knew something important. She had lost the first battle, but Karen Dunn wasn't the kind of woman to surrender. And the war was only beginning. Why is it that the ugliest things are always built in the shadows of something beautiful? Just a week after my wall stood tall, straight, and perfect, I noticed a crew of men dragging lumber into the narrow strip of land that wasn't mine at all, but common property owned by the HOA. It was the drainage easement, land no one was supposed to touch. At first, I thought maybe Karen had finally admitted defeat and was putting in something official, maybe even her own fence. But within hours, I realized it wasn't a fence. It was an abomination. They called it a screen. I called it what it really was, a spite fence. Ugly, uneven latticework. Cheap lumber, untreated, warped already from the sun. They bolted one crooked section on top of another, climbing higher and higher, the sound of drills and hammers filling the air like a dare. By the end of the first day, it towered 8 feet, casting a long shadow across my back patio where I liked to drink my morning coffee. By the second day, it was 10 feet, absurd and grotesque, like a giant tic-tac-toe board built by anger itself. Neighbors peeked from their windows. Mark and Sarah, the quiet couple next door, shook their heads in disbelief. Karen was daring me to complain, to rage, to fight her in the swamp of HOA hearings where she held all the cards. But I wasn't going to play her game. Instead, I made a different call, not to the HOA, not to Karen, but to the County Code Enforcement Office. I dialed Dave, a county inspector I'd known for years. Fair man, straight shooter. He didn't care about HOA politics, only about code. "Dave, it's Michael Cole," I said. "Got a strange situation over here in Sunnyside. You might want to take a look." I sent him pictures. The massive illegal fence teetering over my yard, taller than any regulation allowed, 10 feet of petty vengeance. There was a pause on the line, then his flat reply. "A 10-foot lattice fence on common property with no permit. That ought to be interesting." He showed up that afternoon, white county truck, clipboard, camera. He didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. He just walked around the structure, measuring, snapping photos. And sure enough, like a hawk sensing a threat, Karen came striding out of her house, lips pursed, eyes sharp. "Can I help you?" she demanded. Dave didn't even look up from his clipboard. "Are you the president of this HOA?" "I am," she said proudly. "Then you're responsible for this unpermitted 10-foot structure." "It's a landscaping screen," she sputtered. "Doesn't require a permit." Dave finally looked at her, tired eyes meeting her fire. "Ma'am, anything over 7 feet requires a county permit, period. This is 10, and it's a hazard. A strong wind would knock this thing straight into your neighbor's yard." I stayed on my porch, silent, watching the scene unfold like a play I'd written months ago. "You'll be receiving a citation," Dave said, tearing the top sheet off his clipboard and slapping it against her chest. 14 days to remove it or $500 a day in fines. And ma'am," he paused, his voice flat as concrete, "that structure fails code, gravity, and taste." Her face drained white. I didn't gloat, I didn't even smile. I just stood there in the doorway, arms folded, watching her clutch a piece of paper she couldn't ignore from a man she couldn't bully. But I knew something then. Karen wasn't done, not by a long shot. Cornered animals never retreat quietly. And if she couldn't tear my wall down with lumber, she would try to bury me under something far dirtier. Paper. And when the first bogus fine arrived in the mail, folded neatly into a crisp HOA envelope, I knew my quiet war was about to erupt into a storm. It started with a whisper in the mailbox. A white HOA envelope, clean and crisp, sitting among bills and flyers. I remember holding it in my hand, the paper unnervingly light, but the weight of it sinking deep into my stomach. The violation, improper lawn maintenance, fine $50. I laughed out loud at first. My lawn was perfect. I paid professionals to keep it that way. But tucked inside was a photograph, patchy grass, weeds, brown spots, not my yard, not even close. I stared at it, then out at my own lawn, green and lush under the morning sun. The angle in the picture was odd, warped. The more I studied it, the clearer it became. It was fake, doctored. She hadn't even tried very hard. And that's when it hit me. Karen had shifted battlefields. If she couldn't break my wall with lumber, she'd bury me in paperwork. But I didn't get angry. I got organized. I walked out with my phone, stood in the exact spot the bogus photo had been taken from, and snapped my own picture. This one was time-stamped, with the day's newspaper held in my hand like a silent witness. Side by side, the truth was obvious. Her photo was a fabrication. Mine, the proof. I slipped them into a folder and labeled it Exhibit A. 3 days later, another envelope. $100 this time. Violation, unapproved exterior modification. She was going after the wall that had been legally approved by her silence, the wall I had documented from blueprint to final block. I pulled out my copy of the application, the video of me dropping it in the HOA mailbox, the time-lapse footage of construction beginning on day 15 exactly as the rules allowed. That went into the folder too, Exhibit B. It didn't stop. The envelopes kept coming. Improper recycling bin storage, oil stain on driveway. Violations she invented from thin air, stacking fines like bricks, trying to build a prison around me. I called Tom, the retired accountant, and spread the notices across my table. He frowned, shaking his head slowly. "This is her classic move," he said. "She floods you with fines, then sends a letter from the HOA lawyer. Eventually, she slaps a lien on your house. Most people panic. They don't know the difference between a fake claim and a real one. They pay just to make her go away." "But is it legal?" I asked. He smirked. "Legal on paper, maybe. Real? No, she's bluffing. But to fight it, you'll need proof, a mountain of it." I tapped the folder, already building one. The final straw came a week later. A certified letter, formal notice of lien against my property. $1,500 in fines, no hearing, no board vote, no appeal, just her signature of power like a queen stamping her decree. I read it twice, then set it down. My house, the biggest thing I owned, the thing I'd poured sweat and years into, was being threatened by a lie. Buddy was furious when I told him. "That's it, Mike. This is harassment. Let's fight fire with fire. Junk mail, pizza deliveries, signs in her yard, you name it." It was tempting. God, was it tempting, but that wasn't me. "I don't tear things down," I told him. "I build, and I'll build a case so solid she won't touch it." Still, I wasn't blind. A woman willing to fake documents was dangerous. Desperation makes people reckless, so I upgraded my defenses. That Saturday, I installed cameras, small, discreet, high-definition eyes hidden under eaves and in corners. One pointed at the street, another at the wall, a third at my back porch, not scarecrows but hunters, quiet, unblinking, recording everything. As I tightened the last mount, Mark from next door called over the fence. "Cameras, huh?" he said, nodding toward Karen's towering 10-foot monstrosity still rotting behind her house. "Just being careful," I said. He gave a small, sympathetic nod. "Don't blame you. We see a lot from our kitchen window, if you ever need anything." It was the first crack in the silence from my neighbors, proof I wasn't completely alone. And as I stood on the ladder, adjusting the lens toward the wall, I realized something chilling. The paper war was only the beginning. Karen's lies had failed on the page, which meant the next battle wouldn't come in an envelope. It would come in the dark. It happened on a night when the world felt too still, the kind of quiet that presses down on your chest like a weight. I was in my office, the glow of a desk lamp spilling across blueprints for a new job. My house should have felt like a sanctuary, but lately it had become a bunker. The curtains twitched across the street too often. Karen's car slowed whenever she passed. Every glance from her porch was a silent accusation. That's why I'd wired the floodlights to a remote switch on my desk. Why I kept my phone closed, the cameras recording every inch of my property. I wasn't being paranoid. I was being prepared, because I knew Karen. She wasn't done, not with fake fines, not with doctored photos. A person like her only escalates. The buzz of my phone shattered the silence. Motion detected, camera 2. My stomach dropped into something cold and steady. Camera 2 was the wide-angle lens on the wall. I clicked the feed, the grainy night vision sharpening into shapes I'll never forget. Two figures, hooded and masked, creeping along my side yard. One of them carried something heavy, long handle, iron head, a sledgehammer. My pulse didn't spike, my hands didn't shake. It was almost worse than fear. It was a cold, deliberate calm. This was it, the escalation I'd been waiting for. For a heartbeat, the fury boiled. I wanted to rip open the door, storm into the yard, scream until my voice broke. But my rule, the one I'd built my life around, echoed in my head. You don't swing first. So I picked up the phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? My name is Michael Cole, I said evenly, like I was ordering takeout. My address is 123 Sunny Lane. There are two individuals on my property attempting to destroy my wall with a sledgehammer. They are masked. I am inside. Cameras are recording. Are you safe in the house, sir? Yes. Stay on the line. Officers are on the way. At the same time, my thumb flicked the switch on the remote. Floodlights exploded across my yard, blinding white-hot. The two figures froze, caught like deer in headlights. One flinched, panic already clawing at him. The other, bigger, angrier, lifted the sledgehammer with a snarl only the night could hear. He swung. The dull thud of iron meeting concrete echoed through the speakers, heavy and unsatisfying. My wall didn't even flinch. One of the suspects is striking the wall, I narrated calmly to the operator. 6 feet tall, heavy build. The other is smaller, appears hesitant. The bigger one swung again, angrier, louder. Metal clanged, mortar dust shook loose, but the wall held. Across the street, lights flicked on in neighboring houses, curtains parted, and then the glow of a smartphone lit up Mark and Sarah's kitchen window. They were recording too. Sirens began faint in the distance, a promise growing louder. The vandals heard it. The smaller one tugged at the other's sleeve, desperate to run. The sledgehammer clattered to the ground, abandoned. They scrambled for the street, clumsy, tripping over themselves, but they didn't get far. Two police cruisers swung around the corner, headlights pinning them like animals in a trap. Tires screeched, doors flew open, voices boomed into the night. Police, get on the ground, hands where we can see them. It was over in less than a minute. I stayed on the phone, describing every detail until the officer confirmed they had both suspects detained. Only then did I hang up, step to the front door, and open it. Red and blue lights washed over my street, neighbors gathering in hushed clusters, whispering. One officer approached me, professional and calm. "Sir, are you Michael Cole?" "I am." "Thank you for your call. Can you identify these individuals?" I looked past him to the two figures sitting on the curb, hands cuffed behind their backs. The masks were off now, faces pale and scared in the harsh light. One was young, barely out of his teens, fear written in every line of his jaw. The other was older, heavier, someone I recognized instantly. He wasn't just any neighbor. He was one of Karen's loyal board members, a man who'd sat beside her at every meeting, nodding along to every word. And the boy, he had Karen's sharp eyes. Her nephew. My wall hadn't cracked, but now her empire had. The night ended in sirens and handcuffs, but the morning carried a different kind of silence, the kind that hums with rumor and revelation. By the time the sun rose over Sunnyside, word had already spread. Neighbors walked slower past my house, pausing just long enough to glance at the wall, the floodlights, the patch of lawn where two would-be vandals had been pinned to the ground. I barely slept. Instead, I sat in my office, waiting, and when the knock finally came, it wasn't timid. It was the firm rap of someone carrying authority. Detective Miller introduced himself with the kind of calm that only comes from years of sorting lies from truth. He didn't ask me to tell the story in grand detail. He just asked for the facts, and that's exactly what I gave him. I handed over my folder, months of careful documentation. The butchered Hedges, the bogus fines, the fake lien, every certified letter, every timestamp. I gave him the USB drive with my camera footage, clear shots of the masked figures creeping in, the blinding floodlights, the pathetic swing of the sledgehammer, the panic, the retreat, the arrest. He didn't hide his respect. "You've been very methodical, Mr. Cole." "I'm a builder," I said. "I like a solid foundation." He nodded. "Well, your foundation about to pay off." And then he told me what I had been waiting to hear. They had seized the suspects' phones. On the nephew's screen, a conversation glowed in black and white. Aunt Karen's words, damning as concrete. "Is the problem handled yet?" His last reply before the sirens hit, "Working on it." It was the thread that tied everything together. The harassment, the lies, the vandalism. It wasn't just Karen's style anymore. It was her hand in writing. By afternoon, the neighborhood had already shifted. Mark and Sarah came to my door, their faces pale but determined. They offered me their phone video, the perfect angle from their kitchen window. I thanked them, and for the first time since the Hedges fell, I felt something more than anger. I felt the neighborhood waking up. But Karen wasn't finished. The next day, the HOA's official Facebook group, usually a wasteland of lost dog posts and passive-aggressive lawn complaints, erupted. Someone leaked the footage. My floodlights, the sledgehammer, the nephew, the board member. Karen's name whispered in every comment like a curse. People who had stayed silent for years suddenly found their voices. Stories poured out. Fines that made no sense. Applications denied without reason. Money disappearing into landscaping projects handled conveniently by her brother-in-law's company. It was like a dam breaking, fear washing away, replaced by fury. Tom, the retired accountant, showed up at my door with papers in hand, eyes alight like a man who had waited years for this moment. "While everyone's focused on the arrests, I kept digging," he said, spreading the HOA budget across my table. "Landscaping invoices are triple what they should be, legal fees through the roof. She's been funneling money into her family's pockets and using community funds to pay that lawyer who sends her threats." There it was, the financial rot under the surface of her kingdom, proof as solid as rebar. And then the notice came, posted on the clubhouse door, splashed across the Facebook group. An emergency HOA meeting. The agenda, recent security incidents and review of board conduct. It was signed not by Karen, but by the two remaining board members. Panic written between every line. This was it, the moment everything had been building toward. Not in the shadows, not in secret. Out in the open, in front of the entire neighborhood. Buddy called that night. "You ready for this? It's going to be a circus." "I'm ready," I told him. "I'm not going to shout, I'm just going to show them the receipts." And as I sat at my desk loading videos, printing evidence, stacking my folder like a builder sharpening his tools, I felt that strange calm settle again. Because this wasn't just about my wall anymore. It was about tearing down hers. The clubhouse smelled like burnt coffee and fear. I'd been to HOA meetings before, sad little gatherings where a handful of neighbors bickered over trash bins and paint colors. But this was different. This was standing room only. Over 100 people crammed shoulder to shoulder, voices buzzing, eyes sharp. The air carried that electric crackle you only feel before something breaks. Karen was already seated at the folding table at the front, flanked by the two board members who hadn't yet been caught in the net. Her face was pale, her smile thin, but she still tried to wear authority like a crown. She banged a tiny gavel on the table. "Let's bring this meeting to order," she said, voice tight. From the back, Buddy called out, "Roll the tape." The room chuckled, a fuse catching. She tried to start with old business, the minutes of the last meeting, but the crowd wasn't having it. Someone shouted, "Let's talk about the arrests." Another voice chimed in, "Yeah, the vandals with the sledgehammer." The room erupted in agreement. I stood then, not shouting, not dramatic, just calm, deliberate. "My name is Michael Cole," I said. "The incident happened on my property, and I can comment on it." The room hushed. I walked to the projector, connected my laptop, and clicked. The first image, a sunny picture of my hedges, full and green, the day I moved in. This was my property 6 months ago. Click. The video played. Karen herself in her pink polo hacking those same hedges to pieces. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The timestamp glowed in the corner. This, I said evenly, was the first act of vandalism. Slide by slide, I laid out the story, the detailed application for the wall, the video of me sliding it into the HOA mailbox, the bylaw clause showing automatic approval after 14 days, the time-lapse of my wall rising block by block. Then the fines. I projected her doctored lawn photo next to my time-stamped shot of my perfect grass. People laughed, real, bitter laughter at the absurdity. Then the bogus lien, stamped and signed without process, threatening my home. The crowd murmured angrily, voices swelling like a storm. That was when Tom stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He just handed out a single-page summary of numbers, simple and damning. "We paid Karen's brother-in-law over $50,000 this year for landscaping," he said. "We paid $20,000 to a lawyer to send residents threatening letters. Our reserve fund is nearly empty." Gasps turned into shouts. People waved their copies in the air like torches. And then I played the final video. The security footage of two masked figures creeping into my yard. The floodlights snapping on. The sledgehammer striking the wall with a hollow, pathetic thud. The panicked retreat. The arrest. I froze the frame on their unmasked faces. Karen's nephew and her loyal board member. The room went dead silent. "This," I said softly, "wasn't a security incident. This was a planned attack ordered by a member of this board." Karen shot to her feet. "That is a baseless accusation. You have no proof," she shrieked. I looked around the room, my voice calm as stone. "The police have the phones, they have the texts, they have Aunt Karen asking if the problem was handled. Detective Miller can confirm." Her face drained of color. The name landed like a hammer. The crowd exploded, shouts of "Resign," "Thief," "Remove her," filled the air. One board member snatched the gavel. "A motion has been made from the floor to remove Karen Dunn as president. Do I have a second?" Dozens of hands shot up. "All in favor," nearly every hand in the room. "All opposed." Karen stood alone. The motion carries, effective immediately. Her purse was already in her hand. She shoved her way through the crowd, avoiding every eye, as dozens of cell phone cameras captured her downfall. By the time she reached her car, her reign was over and her humiliation was viral. The weeks that followed felt like a new season in Sunnyside. Tom was named interim president. An audit stripped the lies bare, bloated invoices, personal vendettas billed to the community. Refund checks arrived. Bogus liens vanished. Kids, toys, and bicycles no longer drew fines. Neighbors smiled again. People waved. The county forced the HOA to tear down Karen's illegal 10-foot monstrosity and build the cost back to the board. All that remained was my wall. But I didn't leave it bare. I drew up a simple trellis design, filled out the new short ACC form, and dropped it in the slot. 3 days later, Tom emailed, approved. That weekend, I planted vines, deep green in summer, burning red in fall. As I packed soil around the roots, I thought about the question that had followed me through it all. Can a good man stay good under pressure? Yes, but only if he builds the right way. Plans, proof, patience. Storms strip the trim, but the foundation stays. Now when I sit on my back patio, I see the wall not as a trophy of war, but as a garden wall. Quiet, solid, alive with vines reaching for the light. My yard is mine again, my peace earned. And every time Karen drives by, and I know she still does, I can see it in her eyes. The wall still makes her furious. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.